13 years ago, I divorced the person I once believed would hold my hand through the rest of my life, and walked out of that marriage with nothing but the two empty hands I was born with. And yet now, right in the middle of her funeral, in front of 260 people, my son looked straight into my face and said, "A useless man like you doesn't belong to this family. You're only here for the money." That was the moment when the scent of lilies, the chill of the rain, and the stench of humiliation merged into an invisible slap that made me understand. Sometimes, the very person you love most is the one who teaches you the harshest lesson about dignity by disgracing you. If you have ever felt yourself pushed out of the family portrait you helped build with your own hands, leave a single, and tell me where you're listening from. Just one small word of sharing is enough to remind us that gratitude and kindness still hold value in this world. I arrived at Portland Riverstone Chapel nearly 10 minutes earlier than planned, yet it felt as though I had arrived a lifetime too late. The Oregon sky that day was covered in slabs of leaden cloud, so low it felt as if raising a hand would let you touch them. The damp stone path leading to the wooden chapel doors gleamed with thin streaks of yellow light from the lamps lining the walkway. The wind carried the smell of old rain, the white lilies from the enormous wreaths, and the cold metallic scent of the door handle I was about to grasp, to face again a woman who had once been the whole of my youth. Isabella. I stood on the steps, clutching a bouquet of white chrysanthemums so tightly it felt as if each fragile petal was slowly seeping into my palm. The only suit I still owned that fit, a dark gray one I had worn to my niece's wedding 3 years ago, now looked painfully out of place among the polished luxury cars lining the entrance of the chapel. Lexus, Range Rover, a brand new Tesla Model S. Each one reflected the life Isabella continued living after she left me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heartbeat, and climbed one more step. But just as I neared the threshold, a figure suddenly blocked my way. I didn't need to lift my head to recognize the expensive Tom Ford cologne, the kind of fragrance I never had enough reason or enough money to buy. My son stood there, in a perfectly tailored black suit, silk tie smooth without a single crease, his face so much like Isabella's it took me a few seconds to steady myself. He wasn't looking at me the way someone looks at a relative they haven't seen in a long time. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's wandered into a place meant for the upper class. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low but sharp, not loud, yet I immediately heard a faint echo from inside the hall. I glanced up at the ceiling above the door. The chapel's microphones were on, connected to the speaker system inside, which meant not only the two of us could hear this conversation. "I came to say goodbye to your mother." The word "I" slipped out of my mouth like something out of rhythm, like a word that had long lost its place in my life. Ryan let out a short, cold laugh, the curve of his mouth identical to the look he gave subordinates in a video meeting I had once accidentally caught a glimpse of. "I didn't ask why you came. You're not part of this family anymore." His words hit the damp stone floor, heavy enough that even the clicking of high heels nearby seemed to pause for a moment. Then, like a slow wave, I heard whispers rising from inside the chapel. The microphones were still on, and his voice had been stretched, amplified through the ceiling speakers, drifting into the ears of more than 260 people, sitting neatly on the polished wooden pews. A middle-aged man in a flawless navy suit walked past, looked me up and down, then turned to the person beside him and said, "He's only here for the money," not bothering to lower his voice. A few muffled laughs escaped, sounding like wooden seats creaking as people shifted away to avoid trouble. I felt the bouquet trembling in my hand, though I wasn't sure whether it was the wind or my own grip. "I came to say my final words to your mother," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'll sit in the back. I won't disturb anyone." Ryan stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw and the tired shadows under his eyes that the concealer failed to cover. "You've caused enough trouble already. You made her suffer. You made me suffer. and then you disappeared into that rotten forest cabin of yours like a coward. Don't come here and pretend you're a man with a conscience." His voice still wasn't loud, but the microphones hanging from the ceiling had no ability to distinguish what should remain private from what ought to be public. I imagined the people sitting inside the chapel, business partners, senior executives, the big names of Portland's tech world, hearing that line as if it were the natural ending to the story they'd believed for more than 13 years. Isabella, the successful CEO. Ryan, the worthy heir, and at the fringes of that story, an ex-husband, a failed father. An elderly woman stepped up to the small table, holding the funeral programs by the entrance, where the words "service program" were embossed in raised letters. She, with her silver hair puffed into place and her elegant black dress, reached for a copy just as she accidentally noticed my hand reaching too. Her eyes skimmed my face for a single second, long enough for me to understand exactly what category she placed me in within her silent hierarchy. Her hand abruptly flicked my wrist aside. The thin sheet of paper that had just brushed my fingertips was knocked up, spun once in the air, then fell onto the tiled floor. "For family only." Her voice was ice cold, but the microphone had already captured those 3 words and broadcast them into the space where people were quietly bowing their heads in remembrance. The program lay on the stone floor, its printed image of Isabella, a black and white photo with a professional smile and sharp eyes, facing the ceiling. I looked down at the paper, then up at the woman who had slapped my hand away. She had already turned her back, not bothering to wait for a response or apology. I didn't bend down to pick it up, not out of pride, but because I knew that if I bent down right there at the chapel's entrance, I might not have the strength to stand back up again. I drew in a long breath, hearing the faint rasp in my lungs after years of climbing utility poles in the cold. "Ryan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "whatever you think, whatever everyone here thinks, I was still your mother's husband for 27 years. I came to keep a promise to myself, not to trouble anyone. I won't do anything to embarrass you further. Things like that have already been enough." At that moment, Ryan blinked, just once, very quickly, but I noticed it. For a fraction of a second, his face shifted, as though he truly understood what I had just said. But a heartbeat later, the familiar coldness returned, as if that moment had never existed, replaced by the expression of a man who believed he stood at the highest point in the room. He stepped back half a pace, turned away, and spoke without looking at me. "If you want to go in, go in. But don't expect anyone to treat you like family." He walked off, his tall figure blending into the stream of black-clad people flowing inside, like a river from which I had long been pushed to the bank. I stood there for a few breaths, then crossed the threshold. The air inside was completely different. There was the smell of old wood, of candles, of lilies and roses arranged in ornate crystal vases. Light from the stained glass windows above spilled down in patches of green, red, and gold across the floor and across the shoulders of those sitting in the front rows. Some people turned to look, some pretended not to see. Some tilted their heads to whisper into another's ear, and the 2 of them quietly chuckled. I caught fragments of drifting sentences. "That's him?" "Yeah, the ex-husband." "Look at that suit." "No shame." I kept walking down the center aisle, feeling as though each step pressed onto a layer of memories that people had carefully buried under thick carpeting and newer stories. I didn't look to either side. I kept my eyes fixed on the front of the chapel, where the dark wooden casket rested among flowers and candlelight. For a moment I wanted to pause longer, but I reminded myself I had already been clearly told I didn't belong to this family anymore. At last I stopped at the very last row beside a stone column. Here the flower scent was lighter, the speaker noise softer, and fewer glances clung to me. I gently set the bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the seat beside me, adjusting the small ribbon I had scribbled on last night. Goodbye, Isabella. Then I sat down, feeling the hard wood against my back, and let my shoulders drop just a little, as though I had set down a portion of the weight I'd been carrying. The organ music in the chapel stretched out like a thin thread, but my mind had already drifted far from Portland Riverstone Chapel, back to the summer of 1985, the moment which, if I had to choose a single breaking point to explain why I was sitting in the last row today, would be the day I pushed open the fog glass door of Salt Creek Diner and saw Isabella for the first time. The little diner sat right off the highway, its neon sign flickering, the smell of French fries, old grease, and burnt coffee blending into a familiar haze I no longer noticed. I had just finished a 16-hour shift, climbing power poles before the sun had even risen, wind cutting at my face like blades, hands numb from gripping cold steel cables, my mind only clear enough to remember each safety step. People said I was crazy for taking every overtime shift I could, but to me, each extra hour meant a bill paid on time, a few dollars saved, one day closer to the dream of having a decent home for the family I didn't yet have. I was exhausted, my back aching like someone had driven stakes down my spine. But when I sat on that cracked leather booth, the feeling was peace. I always felt peaceful when I knew I had done my share of the day's work. And then Isabella appeared beside me, not like some Hollywood bolt of destiny, but like a very simple question no one had ever bothered to ask. She placed a cup of coffee in front of me, leaned down a little, the scent of baked apple pie and cheap soap from her red apron drifting toward me, and asked, "From up on the power poles, what does Oregon look like? Not, are you tired? Not, does the pay treat you well? But what do you see from that height?" It sounded like small talk, but to a line worker used to being treated as background scenery in other people's lives, it felt like someone was finally willing to see the world through my eyes. I laughed and rambled about little rooftops that looked like toys, about kids running across yards who from above were just moving dots of color, about how if you slipped, everything ended fast. So every time I stood up there, I reminded myself there were people waiting for me to come home. Isabella didn't laugh just to be polite. She listened, truly listened. I remember her eyes, sharp, bright, as if she were recording every word somewhere inside her head. And then I saw it, the red notebook peeking out of her apron pocket, its dark red leather cover worn, corners curled, but the edges of the pages inside white as light. I pointed. "What's that?" She pulled it out, held it up like she was showing a treasure. "Dreams. I write everything in here. Ideas. Strange things I observe. Things I hate. Things I want to change. If I ever do something big someday, it'll start right here." Back then, I thought it was just the dreamy talk of a waitress too smart for her own job. But later, I understood. Isabella's whole life was already mapped out in those cream-colored pages, step by step. We loved each other the way two young people with nothing but strength and time do. Borrowing my buddy's old truck to drive her out to Lake Billy Chinook and listen to the wind scream past our ears, sitting on the porch of a cheap motel, eating cold pizza and laughing until midnight. Me telling stories from the power poles, her telling stories about the odd regulars she served, and every night she'd open that red notebook and write something before bed. Sometimes, I teased her, "You keep writing like that, and one day there won't be space left for your dreams." She'd laugh and say, "If it fills up, I'll buy another one. I refuse to run out of dreams before life runs out." In the fall of 1987, Isabella placed the red notebook on the table, open to a page where she had drawn two rings, linked together in black ink, and beneath it wrote, "Harold?" Just one word, but I understood. We were married at Sparks Lake under the pine trees, about 50 people, some co-workers of mine, a few waitress friends of hers, an old pastor who spoke slowly and even got my name wrong. No Ecuadorian roses, no live band, no wedding planner, but I had never felt richer. As we exchanged rings, I saw the red notebook on the nearby bench, open as if she had added another line that very morning. The day our shared dream begins. Then Ryan was born in 1997, during a blizzard that knocked down power lines throughout the town. I remember I was working a 16-hour shift that day, standing on a pole in freezing wind, when the radio crackled and someone shouted, "You've got a baby boy, Harold." I volunteered to stay for the night shift, not because anyone forced me, but because if no one kept those lines up, the entire hospital where Isabella lay would fall into darkness. I finished the job, my hands without feeling, but when I ran into the hospital room and saw Isabella holding Ryan, suddenly every overtime shift I had ever taken felt worth it. From that moment on, my schedule came in only two colors, work and sleep. Some weeks I worked 80, 90 hours, fixing poles, covering night shifts, taking extra weekend jobs, so Isabella could quit the diner, take classes, pursue the marketing, technology, and psychology courses she had always dreamed of. I never complained. I was even proud. You just study, keep dreaming, leave the rest to me. And the red notebook was always there, on the kitchen table, then on the tiny desk, then in her handbag once she started attending conferences and meeting people. In it she began writing Stranger Things, predictive behavior model based on micro-actions, touchpoint system, in-store movement flow analysis. Lines that meant nothing to me then, but the look in her eyes when she reread them was the same look I had when watching Ryan sleep, a blend of worry, tenderness, and hope. In the years that followed, Isabella's behavioral analytics company was born in a tiny rented room with 2 desks, 3 chairs, a whiteboard, and an old server. The first client didn't pay much, but she wrote it into the red notebook as if it were a trophy. Contract number 1, proof a dream can be sold. Then came an award in Seattle, a feature in a tech magazine, 6-figure contracts, 7-figure ones, numbers someone like me, a line worker, never imagined would brush against my life. Meanwhile, Ryan went from the kid who dismantled toys to see the insides to the prodigy everyone admired. At 6, he tinkered with simple code. At 8, he built a computer out of spare parts. At 10, he was taken to young talent conferences. Isabella recorded every one of his milestones like product roadmap entries. Ryan, first programming language. Ryan, first pitch deck for class. Ryan, future CEO. I lived between those two worlds, one of utility poles, sweat, shifts, and meals eaten in a truck, the other of pitch decks, major clients, 2 a.m. emails, and constant flights. At first, our love was strong enough to bridge the gap. Isabella would still curl up beside me on the old sofa every night, notebook in hand, leaning against my shoulder as she wrote, saying, "Without you working 16 hours a day, I'd never dare dream this big." I still believed I was part of that dream, but as time went on, the handwriting in the red notebook mentioned us less and less, and me, and the company more and more. My name appeared less often, from Harold, the one who keeps things peaceful, to Harold, falling behind the pace of change, until eventually it nearly disappeared. The coldness didn't arrive in one sentence, but in hundreds of tiny shifts. She came home later, her eyes skimmed past me faster. The dinners for the 3 of us became dinners for 2, just me and Ryan, while Isabella was busy with meetings on the West Coast, the East Coast, or in some time zone I could no longer keep up with. In 2010, she set a stack of papers in front of me, not thick, but enough to end almost 23 years of marriage. You want peace? Then keep your small little world. But I can't live with a man who scrapes by on pocket change and calls it responsibility. The sentence hit me so hard my chest tightened. All those years of labor in the cold wind, climbing poles, carrying every bill and worry on my back, and in her eyes, all of it was worth no more than pocket change. I stood there, stunned, feeling as if all the silent years of sacrifice had been gathered like a handful of ash and thrown into my face. Not anger, just pain. Pain so sharp, I knew that if I stayed one more minute, I wouldn't be able to hold on to the last of my pride. After that, I left with nothing. Literally nothing. No house, no shares, no demands. I took only the truck, a few clothes, my old toolbox, and the replica of the red notebook Isabella had given me on our 10th anniversary, back when everything was still unbroken. On the first page she had written, "For Harold, the one who reminds me where I started." For 13 years I never opened it, not because I hated her, because I was afraid of seeing the version of her I had lost. And then today, at her funeral, surrounded by admirers of her success, by speeches praising the inspiring female leader, I opened that red notebook under the dim chapel lights. The pages were slightly yellowed, but the handwriting was still clear, leaning right, each letter carrying the warmth of its author. I flipped toward the middle and stopped at a page dated vaguely around 2008. The top line spoke of a major deal, the bottom line of expansion beyond Oregon, and wedged between those two lines was a short note about me, crossed out so heavily with black ink the paper was nearly torn. I had to hold the notebook close to the light to read the fragments that hadn't been swallowed by the ink. Only a few words, but enough to make my heart miss a beat. I sat there for a long time, silent, my eyes fixed on the handwriting nearly torn through by those black ink strokes, until the pastor's soft cough and the scrape of wooden benches pulled me back into the present. The eulogy was nearly over. People were rising to their feet, dresses rustling, the scents of perfume and lilies blending once more. I closed the red notebook, feeling those few short words still burning against my fingertips, then slipped it into my suit jacket, right over my heart. Some questions cannot be untangled in the middle of organ music and the stares of more than 200 people, waiting their turn to shake my hand and offer condolences. I told myself, the envelope in my hand and the line inside the notebook, one of them or both, would give me an answer, but not in this moment. I don't even know what I'm walking toward anymore. My whole life, I thought living decently was enough, but after today, I'm no longer sure that's true. When the ceremony ended and groups of guests left the chapel with faces wrapped in polite sorrow, I remained under the eaves of Riverstone Chapel, breathing in the Portland rain mixed with the scent of wilting white lilies. I was about to open the envelope when my phone vibrated inside the pocket of my old suit jacket. An unknown number. I answered, and the voice of a man, deep, clear, firm as steel, came through. "Mr. Merritt, this is Colton Reeves, Isabella's personal attorney and the executor of the entire estate." I tightened my grip on the phone. Colton Reeves, the name Isabella had mentioned twice, once in 2004 when she was preparing to expand the company to the East Coast, and a second time during an argument about splitting time to care for Ryan. "I know today is difficult," he said in a tone so professional it revealed no true emotion, "but in accordance with Isabella's explicit instructions, you are required to be present at a meeting tomorrow afternoon at my office. Without you, the transfer process cannot begin." I frowned. "Transfer of what? I'm an outsider. I have nothing to do with it." Colton cut me off, softly but sharply. "You don't understand. This is not about the law. This is a share transfer mechanism under a confidentiality clause Isabella updated 8 months ago. The shares only take effect if the designated recipient is physically present and confirms acceptance. No proxy can sign. No authorization is allowed. You must attend." A cold gust slipped across the back of my neck, even though I was still standing under the eaves. I braced one hand against the old wooden post to keep my balance. "You were saying Isabella left shares to me?" "I am not permitted to disclose the contents," Colton replied, each word placed as precisely as on a glass conference table. "But your presence is mandatory. Be there at 3 p.m. He hung up before I could ask anything more. I remained there beneath the sound of rain pattering against the chapel roof tiles, feeling as if someone had set a heavy stone inside my chest. I had not yet steadied myself when the phone vibrated again. This time it was Ryan's number. I did not want to answer, but my hand moved on its own and slid across the screen. His voice hit me like a punch. "Feel good now? What stunt are you pulling? Why did you come? Who gave you the right to stand at my mother's funeral?" I stayed silent. He continued, grinding each word. "I just spoke with Reeves. I know you were asked to come. But let me make this clear. You show up, sign whatever you're supposed to sign, and then you get out of our lives. Don't even dream about getting anything. My mother would never leave you a single cent." I responded in a calm voice that surprised even me. "I don't want anything." On the other end came a contemptuous laugh. "Who are you saying that for? Nobody believes you. You've been poor your whole life. You think I don't know you're just waiting to warm your hands over my mother's estate? I swear, if you mess anything up, I will make sure you have no place left in Portland to live." Then he hung up, no waiting for a reply, no chance for me to say a single word about the wet, aching wound in my chest. I drove back to the cabin in the woods, where I had lived alone for 13 years, the road drenched, the streetlights stretching into long, blurred streaks like memories, refusing to die. When I arrived, I let the engine sit idle for several minutes, not because of the cold, but because I wasn't ready to step into the silence waiting inside. Then I opened the cabin door and turned on the dim yellow light. The familiar space appeared, but colder than usual, the kind of cold that settles in a place that has been without human voices for too long. I stood in the middle of the small room, listening to the wind tapping against the wooden walls and to the heavy sound of my own breathing. I sat down, trying to keep my mind from returning to the words Ryan had just hurled at me, but the silence only made everything sharper. His contemptuous laugh, his threat to drive me out of Portland, the certainty in his voice that all my life amounted to nothing but a hunger for his mother's inheritance. I closed my eyes, but my mind would not settle. Old memories, the years before the family broke, rose in layers, though I had spent 13 years trying to bury them. The air in the cabin was cold and dark like Trillium Lake in mid-January, and as the memories surged up, they opened themselves one layer at a time. Layers I thought I had buried, but that returned with stubborn persistence. Memory peeled open again in layers, layers I had spent 13 years trying to bury, yet they rose like rotted wooden stakes at the bottom of a lake. To understand why Ryan looked at me today, as if I were some parasitic stranger, we have to return to where everything began to tilt, the price paid for Isabella's ambition. At first, it was nothing more than a messy corner of the work desk. Isabella buried herself in papers, contracts, client data. In the early startup days, she was consumed with the ravenous hunger of someone who believed she was carrying a great dream inside her. I loved that, loved the fire in her eyes. But little by little, Ryan began paying for every time Isabella said, "I'll make it up tomorrow." When Ryan turned 6, his first birthday without Isabella, she was in Seattle signing a contract. She video called. Our dinner table still had candles. The cake still had its frosting untouched. Ryan still wore the button-down shirt I had ironed flat. He looked at the screen and asked, "You're really not coming home, Mom?" Isabella gave a rushed smile. "It's your birthday and you have Dad there. That's the best. I'll make it up later." Later meant 2 months later, with an old laptop she no longer needed. When Ryan was 10, his first programming competition. I sat in the parents' section while Isabella's seat remained empty. The plastic chair so cold it felt like it cut my hand every time I tried to lay my jacket over it to save her place. She was on a flight to Chicago. When the competition ended, Ryan said something very small. "Dad, I think I'm not as important as that company." But Isabella made up for her absence with something far more dangerous, the the promise of absolute inheritance. The first time I heard her say it to Ryan, he was 12. I was fixing the kitchen faucet, the board meeting happening over Zoom in the living room, and I heard her say it in the cold, sharp voice of someone used to commanding, "You will inherit everything. Don't let anyone pull you down." Her voice then was not that of a mother. It was that of a CEO training her successor. That sentence, poisonous as a needle. It pierced my son bit by bit over the years, and everything that followed became painfully predictable. I remember the day everything officially broke. In 2009, exactly 1 year before we signed the divorce papers, Isabella and I had a huge fight, the first and the last. I had been called to Ryan's school for an emergency meeting because he got into a fight. I texted Isabella 3 times, no answer. When I finished the meeting and came home, she was sitting in front of her laptop, the screen so bright it cast her reflection on the wall like a stranger. I said, "Ryan is in trouble. He needs you." She didn't look up. "Harold, I'm handling a $4 million deal." "What does any of that mean when your own son is—" "You don't understand anything," she cut in, her voice so sharp it stopped me where I stood. "I am stepping into a world where people must be good, must be fast, must be smart enough to never fall a beat behind. And you? You keep fumbling with your manual labor and think that's enough. This world doesn't wait for the mediocre, Harold. I have to run, and I can't let a man who's falling behind drag me down anymore." I stared at her, each word stabbing straight into my chest. "And me? You're not running with me anymore." She looked up, her eyes cold and drained with disappointment. "You can't keep up with anyone, Harold. Not with me, not with the times. And I can't keep stepping back to drag along a man who refuses to grow. I am tired of pulling you." Ryan stood on the staircase that day. He heard everything, and from that moment on, the way he looked at me changed completely. It was no longer the disappointment of a child, but the contempt of someone convinced his father was useless, slow, and unworthy of his mother. He no longer saw me as his father, but as someone standing in the wrong place within the system he had been raised to lead. I didn't hate him. I hated the environment that nurtured that sentence. And I hated myself, because I hadn't known that all those 16-hour shifts to support my family would become proof of lack of ambition in the eyes of Isabella and my son. And then I remembered the cream-colored envelope the chapel staff handed me at the funeral, the one with the words, "Harold, read after the service, Isabella's request." I returned to the cabin, took it from my coat pocket, sat at the table, and opened it slowly. Only 2 lines. The last thing that needs fixing, Ryan, and maybe the air must change. I collapsed into the wooden chair. Isabella had considered not leaving the inheritance to Ryan. I sat there for a long time. I don't know if it was a minute or an hour, only knowing that whatever Isabella saw before she died, I had never been brave enough to face. The next morning, Portland's rain fell in light mist, each drop landing on the pavement like heavy punctuation marks pressed onto a day already crowded with things I had not yet understood. I arrived at Merit HQ, the glass tower nearly 30 floors high where Isabella had built her entire tech empire. Wearing the old suit I reserved only for truly formal occasions. That suit had been mine on our wedding day, then on the day we opened the first house we ever bought, then on the day I walked away with nothing. Today it accompanied me once more like an uninvited witness. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I felt the stares, not sympathetic, not pitying, but the looks young people in a tech company give something that does not belong in their bright, sharp, fast world. A male employee whispered to the person beside him loud enough for me to hear, "That suit is probably from the dial-up era." Another snickered. Then a young woman with silver-purple hair pulled out her phone, raised it to her face, and spoke quickly into the camera. "Day 5 at Merit HQ. Old man drama on the exec floor." The red light turned on. Live stream. A stream of comments scrolled. Who is that? Sugar daddy or ex-employee? Plot twist. Here to beg for money? One comment with a laughing emoji was so loud she snorted, probably here for inheritance, LOL. What I did not know, but the entire lobby did, was that Ryan had sent an internal email at 7:14 a.m. If Harold Merritt, my biological father, appears at HQ, please limit his access to the executive floors. This is a family matter. One sentence was enough to turn me into family drama in the eyes of everyone in the building. I walked to the reception desk. I have an appointment with Colton Reeves. The receptionist looked me up and down as if determining which service tier I belonged to. Your name? Harold Merritt. I saw her eyes twitch slightly. She glanced quickly at another employee, then pressed the internal phone. There is a man here saying he is Harold Merritt. Yes. Yes, here. She set the receiver down and said, trying to keep her voice neutral, I'm sorry, sir, but the executive board is busy, and under the latest directive, you are restricted from accessing the upper floors. At that moment, the elevator doors slid open and Ryan stepped out. He was flanked by 2 security officers. His eyes brushed over me for half a second, then immediately slid away, as if I were an unwelcome obstruction. He ordered, Security, do not let him up here. One guard, large and stone-faced, approached. Sir, we need you to leave the executive area. I stood there, my hand still gripping my bag strap. I couldn't say a word. The young employees in the lobby began whispering louder, like fish swarming around a piece of bread dropped in the water. I heard a woman's laugh. Oh God, this must be the exec floor family drama today. Someone else raised their phone to record. Comments kept streaming. Ha ha ha, this will hit FYP for sure. Acting CEO kicks out biological father in HQ lobby. Old guy thinks he still has rights. Just when the humiliation was at its peak, a man's voice sounded behind me. Tim, step back. Colton Reeves appeared. Not hurried, not loud, but his presence quieted the entire lobby, as if someone had muted the room. He walked past me, stood in front of Ryan, and held out his phone to him. You should read the last email Isabella sent me. Ryan took the phone. Read. Within seconds, his face tightened. Annoyed, but unable to argue. Colton turned to the guards. By Isabella Merritt's direct instruction, Mr. Harold Merritt is authorized to access all executive areas. No one is to block him. This is a legally binding internal directive. The guard withdrew his hand immediately and bowed slightly. Yes, sir. Colton stepped beside me. This way, Harold. Let's go to the conference room. The elevator doors closed slowly, sealing us away from the stairs and the quiet laughter in the lobby. I stood inside, my heart still aching from what had just happened. Ryan stood in front of me, arms crossed, his gaze full of simmering irritation. I don't understand why Mom gave you this authority, but don't think it changes anything. When the elevator doors opened on the 28th floor, the executive level, I entered a space I had only ever seen from afar in magazine photos. The large glass conference room, walnut wood walls, a 14-seat table, cold white LED lights. Colton spoke, his voice steady and controlled. Everyone, please take your seats. Ryan sat at the head of the table as if it were still his natural domain, while I stood paused for a moment, unsure where a place for me could possibly exist in this room. I sat at the edge of the long wooden conference table, a room designed to make powerful people feel untouchable. The glass wall looked straight out over the Willamette River, shifting into sunset colors, reflecting light onto the tense faces of the 3 of us. Me, Ryan, and Colton Reeves. Colton set the stack of documents down, adjusted his tie, then spoke with the voice of someone who had practiced this profession for 17 years. Steady, unfaltering. We will move on to the portion of the estate designated for Mr. Ryan Merritt. Ryan leaned forward slightly. Maybe he believed this was the moment his entire life had been trained for. The child raised on Isabella's mantra. One day, everything will be yours. Colton opened the first page. According to the legally certified will of Mrs. Isabella Merritt, signed and notarized 11 months ago, Mr. Ryan is to inherit a penthouse at Riverside Crown Tower. Current appraised value, $1,700,000. Ryan smiled, the smile of someone evaluating an asset he believes is rightfully his. He even tilted his head to check my reaction, as if expecting envy. I did not react. Colton continued. Mr. Ryan will also receive a cash sum of $1,200,000 from the liquid investment accounts. Ryan exhaled lightly, as if confirming the universe was functioning along its proper axis. Additionally, Colton turned to a page with a notary seal. Mr. Ryan shall receive the Merritt Travel Trust, an annual allowance of $30,000, designated for business expansion travel expenses. Ryan let out a small laugh and spun the Mont Blanc pen in his hand. That fund was created when I was in college, he said as if addressing the world. Of course it has to be mine. Colton looked directly at him. This fund carries a condition. Mr. Ryan must remain employed at Merritt Analytics for a minimum of 24 months, or until the company undergoes an ownership restructuring. If he leaves earlier, the fund is temporarily locked. For the first time since entering the room, Ryan's smile stalled for a beat. But only a beat. He brushed it aside. Just procedure. My mother always wanted me to maintain a leadership position. Out in the hallway, 2 young employees had paused, pretending to look at the bulletin board, but clearly eavesdropping. The glass wall did not block all sound, and Ryan's voice, as always, carried like a declaration of dominion. He folded his arms, leaning back in his chair like someone certain of victory. So, how much is left? The company? My mother's shares? Colton did not answer immediately. He closed each document slowly, aligning them with precise care until only one silver folder remained on the table, stamped with the seal of the Merritt family estate. The air in the room seemed to contract. I could feel my own heartbeat, not from expectation, but from the strange stillness in Colton's demeanor. He inhaled lightly, then met Ryan's eyes. Now, his voice dropped lower, heavier, as if each word carried a weight the entire room could barely hold. We come to the primary asset, the portion that determines the entire remaining value of Mrs. Isabella's estate. Ryan straightened in his seat. The 2 employees in the hallway also froze. I saw my reflection in the glass door, a man bracing for collapse, yet standing silent like the distant mountain ranges. And Ryan. He was about to face the moment he had always believed belonged unquestioningly to him, and he had no idea Isabella had prepared a blade sharp enough that even the sound of it hitting the table would be enough to change everything. Colton opened the silver folder, his movement so slow it felt intentional, as if he were stretching the air in the room to its breaking point. The afternoon light from the glass wall fell across the table, forming a cold strip of brightness, cutting over documents that I had no idea would alter the entire course of my life. The primary asset of Mrs. Isabella Merritt's estate, Colton said, lowering his voice, a register, as if drawing a boundary between the ordinary and the point of no return. Ryan leaned slightly forward, his hand gripping his Mont Blanc pen so tightly the knuckles turned white. He thought everything remaining, the company, the shares, the power, was sliding toward him like a slope he only had to stand on and collect. But the world was not moving in the way he was accustomed to. Colton pulled out the first page. According to the will and the strategic addendum signed 11 months ago by Mrs. Isabella Merritt, Mr. Harold Merritt is designated to inherit the following. I heard Ryan let out a laugh, small, dry, impatient. He thought this was the preface to a few lines of sentimental compensation. But then Colton continued, clear, steady, without skipping a word. First, all liquid assets of Mrs. Isabella, valued at $58 million. I did not react in time. The room did. A soft, holy, escaped from the left corner where a young assistant sat taking minutes, immediately followed by her colleague tugging her sleeve with a warning glare. Ryan, however, went still. His mouth opened, then closed again. But Colton was not done. He turned to the second page. Second, 71% ownership of Merit Analytics and its subsidiaries, including strategic authority, executive authority, and full disposition rights over company assets. I heard footsteps stop outside the hallway. Then another set. Someone was peering through the frosted glass of the conference room. Ryan blinked repeatedly every 2 seconds. A vein throbbed visibly at his temple. The estimated value of these shares, Colton said, enunciating, is $240 million. I no longer felt my face connected to my body. Those numbers, 58 million, 240 million, 71%, they fell before me like a hailstorm made of stone. Ryan shot to his feet. His chair flipped backward, crashing onto the wooden floor with a sound loud enough to make the employees in the hallway turn their heads. "What?" he shouted. His chest heaved. His face flushed red. His hand stabbed through the air toward me as if I had stolen something sacred from him. "You're kidding me, right? My father? Him? He gets everything?" Colton did not react to his fury. He opened the third document. Third, Mrs. Isabella nominates Mr. Harold Merritt to assume the position of chairman of the board at Merit Analytics, effective immediately upon the reading of the will. The murmuring outside the hallway grew louder. Shadows multiplied behind the frosted glass. Employees, assistants, security, pretending to be busy while their ears clung to every word. Ryan slammed his palm onto the table. The water glass in front of him jumped, spun, then crashed to the floor and shattered. But Colton still was not finished. He placed another thick folder before Ryan, heavy, dense, stamped with hospital seals and independent psychological evaluations. "And finally, to prevent any legal disputes," Colton said, his voice sharpening slightly, "Mrs. Isabella voluntarily completed a full mental capacity assessment. Neurologist, forensic psychologist, state-licensed notary, all confirmed she was fully lucid, competent, and under no coercion." Ryan froze, as if someone had unplugged him. The murmurs outside began spreading across the hallway. 71%? The whole company goes to the acting CEO's father? No way. I still sat there, unmoving. I was not happy, not proud, just stunned, so shocked I did not know how to breathe correctly. Colton closed the folder with a small, crisp sound, sharp as a final period. "That," he said, "is the entirety of the primary estate." 2 seconds of silence. 3. Then Ryan erupted. He screamed, his voice drilling against the glass. "This is fraud! Forgery! All of it is fake!" And he slammed his hand on the table again, sending bits of shattered glass flicking up around his feet like sparks of broken crystal. Ryan stood there, his face red, as if it were about to explode, both hands trembling violently with a fury that had nowhere left to go. He pointed straight at me, his fingernails seeming sharp enough to slice the air in half. "You're a failure, a pathetic old coward who never accomplished anything, and you dare take everything my mother built?" Every word he screamed hit me like a splash of ice water to the face. In his eyes, I saw Isabella herself. Ambition, pride, the terror of losing, but twisted, magnified to something warped and dangerous. From the hallway, employees flinched at the sound of the table being struck. A security guard rushed in, his face tense. "What's going on in here? We heard banging." He didn't even finish before Ryan spun around and shouted into the poor man's face, "Get out! All of you get out! This is family business, not the concern of some guy in a uniform." The guard stepped back but did not leave. Protocol prevented him from exiting if physical aggression was occurring. A young employee passing through the hallway reacted instinctively, raising a phone and capturing exactly 3 seconds of Ryan overturning the table. That clip would later spread throughout the company like a wildfire. Ryan didn't know, or didn't care, that the all-glass conference room reflected every movement outward like a stage. He gritted his teeth, leaned across the table, and screamed into my face. "You dragged my mother down, you dragged me down, and now you want to swallow this entire life? You don't deserve anything!" Colton remained frighteningly calm as he opened a file with a green seal. "Ryan," he said, "this is the independent mental capacity evaluation Isabella requested for herself. 2 neurologists, 1 forensic psychologist, 3 separate assessments. The final conclusion." He held up the conclusion page and read each word. "Full and unimpaired clarity of cognition." Ryan looked as if someone had yanked the air out of his lungs. He took 1 step back, then lunged forward again, sweeping every document Colton had placed on the table. A thunderous wham erupted. The table tilted sideways. Papers, reports, affidavits, financial statements, asset valuations shot upward before raining down like a storm of documents. Some pages even spun in midair before touching the floor. That sight, a 26-year-old man, a self-proclaimed future CEO, screaming among the papers his mother left behind. Voices whispered from the hall. "Oh my God, an actual meltdown." The security guard stepped forward. "Sir, I need to ask you to calm down." Ryan screamed, "Don't anyone touch me." Then he turned to me, his eyes bloodshot, tears suddenly sliding down his cheeks. Not from pain, but from the feeling of power being ripped out of his hands, like someone peeling off skin. "Why, would she choose you?" I didn't answer, partly because I didn't know, partly because that question wasn't mine to answer. It was his. Colton stood, saying nothing further. He closed the large folder before him, then opened the top drawer and took out a cream-colored envelope. Isabella's neat handwriting centered on it. Message to Harold and Ryan. He placed the envelope on the table, amid the scattered papers. "It is time," Colton said, his voice dropping lower. "Mrs. Isabella left a final message for the 2 of you." Colton set the envelope on the table as if placing down something heavier than metal. No one in the room moved. Ryan stood there panting, his hands still trembling from the outburst moments before. Papers lay scattered around his feet like the remnants of a storm. I looked at the familiar handwriting on the envelope. Neat, slightly slanted to the right, each letter seemingly written with the last breath of someone who had spent her whole life moving at speed under pressure. Colton slid the letter out. The sound of paper brushing the air made the room so silent I could hear the elevator stopping out in the hallway. "A letter from Mrs. Isabella Merritt to Harold and Ryan," Colton read, then opened the first page. His voice shifted, softer, slower, as though he knew every sentence he was about to speak had the power to break the memories of at least one of us. "Harold, if you're hearing this, it means I am no longer in the world where we once tried to hold on to a piece of each other." I felt something warm run down my spine. Ryan swallowed hard. "I never stopped loving you." My heart skipped. Colton continued. "Not the love of youth, of fire, of naive ambition, but the love of quiet, of a rain-soaked porch roof, of the nights when you worked 16 hours and still came home with a smile for me and Ryan. I forgot those things when my world grew too big, and the way I looked at you became too small." I closed my eyes briefly. Isabella had never spoken words like that while alive, certainly not in the final years of our marriage. Ryan stood frozen, not even breathing heavily anymore. Colton turned to the second page. "Harold, I know that choosing to give you these assets will make the entire city think I've lost my mind, but you are the only person I've ever met who does not want power. One should never place a crown on the head of someone who craves it. I tried imagining giving the company to the board or to a trust or to Ryan himself, but in every version, Merit Analytics became a machine that only knows how to chase growth. And you are the only one I trust would dare to stop if the company began losing what is right. People should give such things to the one who is always willing to set them down for someone else. I swallowed a sound that was almost a sob. Colton paused, then read the portion for Ryan. Ryan, my son. Ryan moved one step forward, then collapsed into a chair as if his legs could no longer bear the weight of those words. Colton read on. You are smart. You are quick. You have every condition to become a good leader. But you do not understand responsibility yet. You only understand privilege. Ryan stiffened. His eyes reddened. His breath came fast but small, as if he were trying to swallow down a tear he had never allowed to appear in front of anyone. I'm sorry, Colton read, for raising you on the fear of losing instead of the courage to do what is right. I turned success into a stick on your back and failure into a ghost. That was my fault, not yours. The hallway door cracked slightly open. An employee waiting outside happened to hear the final sentence through the gap in the frosted glass. She raised a hand to her mouth. Isabella's confession, the founder of the company, the most powerful woman on the 28th floor, was not something that could stay hidden long. I knew from that moment the story would spread throughout the entire building, not through reports, not through internal emails, but through the breath of the people whose lives were carried by Isabella's legacy. Colton turned to the last page, but what chilled me was not the words. It was the strip of opaque tape covering a final sentence. Colton frowned. It appears there is an additional line she sealed by her own instruction. Ryan shot up. Open it! Colton looked at me. Harold, she allowed only you to decide. In the room strewn with papers, the legacy of a woman who prepared everything down to her final breath, I felt the gaze of two men converge on me. One was my son, fresh from the greatest collapse of his life. The other was the loyal executor, unwilling to cross a boundary Isabella herself had drawn, and I, the only one granted the right to remove that strip of tape. I touched the opaque tape, cold, rough, like pressing my fingers against a final door Isabella wanted me to open at the exact moment, neither earlier nor later. But just as I began to lift the edge of the tape, Ryan suddenly broke into tears, an abrupt, raw sob that cracked open the air like glass shattering. The room wavered under the weight of tangled emotion until Colton intervened, his voice firm but gentle. We will stop here for today. He gathered all the papers on the table, placing the envelope with the sealed line back into his case, as though storing something sacred. Ryan turned away, one hand braced on the table, while I could only stare at that small strip of tape. Small, but hanging in the air like fate. The three of us left the conference room in silence. None of us had the strength to say anything more. I only remember the feeling when I stepped into the elevator. Something had changed forever, though I did not yet know what it was. Before we parted, Colton placed the envelope into my hand. When you are ready, open it. Isabella wanted only you to decide. The next morning, when I entered Merit Analytics through the employee entrance, not the VIP entrance Ryan used to walk through, I already knew nothing would be the same as yesterday, but I did not expect everything to unfold so quickly it felt almost cruel. The clip of Ryan screaming, slamming the table, knocking over a chair in the conference room last night, just a few hours later, had already spread throughout the entire company, no one knowing exactly when it started. First it appeared in the marketing Slack channel. Then it moved to engineering, then into the company-wide group chat of 1,200 employees. CEO Meltdown MP4. Only a few hours, yet those few hours were enough to destroy the image of a perfect Ryan Isabella had built for 2 decades, and exactly 2 hours later, the clip leaked outside. I received a message from Colton. You should prepare yourself. Oregon Tech Insider posted it first, then Oregon Business, then the Portland Ledger. The headline, large and bold at the top of the page, felt like a needle stabbing into the company's entire history. Shock. $240 million company handed to ex-husband, not heir. Below it was Ryan's meltdown clip, looped second by second with a sarcastic caption. This is the reaction when your mother's company gets handed to your father. I stood in the lobby, watching young employees walk past while glancing at me from the corner of their eyes. Gone were the curious looks of old man drama. Now there was confusion mixed with a touch of awkwardness. Some even nodded to me politely, something that had never happened the day before. Just as I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. An email from the board of directors. The subject line held only 2 words. Ryan suspended. The content stated clearly, due to severe violations of ethical conduct and creating an unsafe work environment. Employee Ryan Merritt is suspended effective immediately pending investigation. I finished reading without knowing whether to feel relieved or heartbroken. The child I once held in my arms, now suspended by the very company his mother built in front of thousands of eyes. When the elevator opened on the 27th floor, the acting CEO, Mrs. Marjorie Lane, was already waiting. A woman in her early 50s, hair tied high, her eyes steady but not cold. "Mr. Harold?" she asked. "Colton informed me. We need to talk." We walked into what used to be Isabella's office, once the sanctum of power for all of Merit Analytics. The faint scent of Isabella's old perfume still lingered on the leather chair. Marjorie handed me a stack of documents. "This is the transition schedule. After today's shock, the board wants you to temporarily assume the position of chairman to stabilize the situation." I placed my hand on the smooth, cold desk. It did not feel like victory. It felt like standing at a crossroads I never expected to return to. Rain that night poured down as if someone were emptying the entire sky onto the tin roof of my cabin at the foot of Pinecrest Hill. The wind slammed against the wooden walls like the urgent knocking of someone begging to be let inside. I was sitting at my desk, my finger resting on the line Isabella had written in the red notebook. "The last thing that needs fixing, Ryan." When I heard a car brake hard on the dirt yard, then a car door slam shut. I knew only one person would be desperate enough to show up in a storm like this. Ryan. He stood at the door when I opened it, his hair soaked, his shirt clinging to him, his eyes red from lack of sleep or from crying, I couldn't tell. His face had none of the sharpness of a director, none of the constant pride, only a young man trying to stand upright without knowing where to begin. "Dad," he started, but his voice cracked on the first word, as if anger, confusion, and fear were all tangled in his throat. He pressed his lips together for a few seconds, then looked straight at me. "The envelope, the one with the tape in the conference room. What did Mom leave for you? What did she write in it?" The rain behind him fell so heavily it formed a curtain of water. In all 37 years, this was the first time I saw Ryan standing at my door without carrying an order, a threat, or an attitude of someone who believed he stood above me. I opened the envelope, and Ryan stared so intently it seemed as though blinking would mean missing the last thing his mother left behind. I peeled off the tape, unfolded the paper, and read each word, slowly. Isabella's handwriting, steady, strong but slightly trembling, spread across the page like the final breath of a life full of collisions. "Harold, if you are reading this and I am no longer here, then everything I leave behind will belong to you. Not because you need it, but because I know only you will do what is right." Ryan clenched his fist but said nothing. I continued reading. When I was young, I chased power, chased values I thought would lead me to a life that mattered. I wanted to stand in a place where people had to look up at me, wanted to prove to the world I was worthy. But in climbing higher, I forgot myself, and forgot the man who carried the heaviest things so I could walk lightly. I glanced at Ryan. His eyes were no longer sharp, but seemed to sink. I kept reading. Only when illness came, when the hospital room held nothing but the sound of a heart monitor and my own breathing, did I finally understand that a marriage's love is not something to show the world, but the person who stays in the room after all beautiful things have left. I regret deeply not realizing that while I still had time. Ryan took a shallow breath, as if trying to hide it. My voice stayed steady. If there is anything left that can save our son, it is the love between father and child. Each word tugged something tight inside Ryan and snapped it back. He didn't cry, didn't scream, just froze, the way someone freezes when touching a truth they've avoided all their life. I finished the last part of the letter. Harold, I made you endure many years of struggle and hurt without ever apologizing. I cannot rewind time, but I hope you, one last time, will help our son understand the value of family, of the bond he may lose if he keeps walking the path I once walked wrong. Help him. For me. I folded the letter and set it on the table. Ryan looked at me, his eyes free of disdain now, filled only with raw confusion. Dad, he said, his voice low enough to almost break. Why? Why did Mom treat you like that? As if you were never good enough for her? I placed my hand on the letter, not turning away. Because your mother chased things she thought mattered, until losing almost everything was the only way she could see what she had missed. And now, the last thing she asked is that I help you not repeat her path. Ryan's throat tightened. He looked at me. It was the gaze of someone realizing for the first time how deeply they had been wrong, yet not knowing where to start repairing. No excuses, no protests, no blame. Only a faint trembling at his jawline and a held breath as if he was trying to swallow his own shame. I said nothing more. Some wounds collapse a person faster when spoken over. Ryan stayed silent too. The cabin held only the sound of rain striking the roof, the yellow light casting two shadows, sitting a small distance apart, yet separated by 13 years of drifting away. After a while, Ryan stood. He didn't look at me long, didn't speak, didn't ask further, but the way he clenched his hand, the slight slump of his shoulders, the heavy breath he took before turning away, all of it said more clearly than any apology that he was drowning in regret. He stepped outside. The rain still fell, and I watched his silhouette fade into the water, his walk no longer proud, no longer cold, but like someone carrying a weight he had built with his own hands. The cabin door closed behind him, leaving a silence so thick I could hear the wind scraping through every pine branch. I just sat there, staring at the space Ryan had just left, knowing he walked away tonight, not with the triumph of an heir, but with the shame of a son who had finally seen the truth he'd run from for years. I slowly folded the envelope and closed the cabin door, not out of hesitation, but because I understood better than anyone. The truth, if it has waited 13 years for me, can wait one more night. That night, Portland drifted by slowly, as if holding its breath for something about to change direction. On Monday morning, Portland had a rare kind of gentle sunlight, a thin veil of brightness draped over the city after a long rain. I walked into Merit Analytics not as someone being thrown out of the lobby by his own son, but as the person Isabella had chosen to reset the moral compass of the company she spent 30 years building. But I did not feel power, only responsibility, heavy as stone. In the large conference room where Ryan once shouted in my face, we now held the first meeting of the Merit Ethical Leadership Foundation, the leadership ethics program I created after reading Isabella's final words. We do not teach how to win the market, I said. We teach how not to lose your soul when you win. No one applauded. No need. This was not a PR project. This was Isabella's late apology and my promise. I stepped back to let the program lead begin the presentation. At the far corner of the room sat Ryan, no suit, no arrogance, no entitlement. Just a 27-year-old man learning how to be human again from zero. At the end of the meeting, I stood by the window, looking down at the Willamette River, shimmering with a pale silver green. Behind me came slow, hesitant footsteps. Ryan stood there. His face no longer carried the sharp coldness I had come to expect, but a very human confusion. He opened his mouth. Dad, can I call you Dad, in the real sense? In that moment, I simply nodded. Ryan bowed his head, his voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry. For everything. For all the years I looked down on you. For thinking success naturally belonged to me. I didn't know how much you sacrificed so Mom could rise, so this family could stand. But now I understand. He drew a deep breath, as if stepping through a truth he had once avoided. Mom told me, the only thing that could save me was your love. I'm not brave enough to promise I'll change in one night, because I know I've gone too far. But I'll try. I'll try every day to become someone who doesn't just chase achievement, but knows how to value people and family. I placed my hand on his shoulder gently, and for the first time in his life, Ryan stood still to receive it. In that brief touch, I knew the son I thought I had lost years ago was finally finding his way back. I did not say anything else. I didn't need to. In that moment, silence carried more weight than any speech. That evening I returned to the cabin. The rain had stopped. The yellow light from the cabin door stretched across the damp path, leading down toward the pine forest like an opening into another life. And I understood. Justice is not revenge. Justice is reclaiming the value that was once taken from you. After 30 years, I had received my part back. Not money, not power, but truth. And that truth was enough for me to begin again, slowly but steadily, like the last light of day spreading across the Willamette. If you have ever felt the pain of being pushed out of the very family picture you helped build, leave and tell me where you are listening from, so we can remind each other that gratitude, kindness, and family are still things worth keeping, worth protecting, more than any inheritance could ever be.